Moving on to layer masks. Before we can address layer masks, we need to understand truly your light source and the atmosphere surrounding your light source. For external, or shall I say outside lighting, exterior lighting, your light source is obviously going to be either the sun or the moon. Often, it's not going to be man-made lighting. And understand that the sun or the moon shine differently in different corners of the world. This affects the atmosphere inside of your setting, how this sun is positioned, the direction of its light, the bounce of its light, the cloud cover, if there is any, and generally the position or geography of your setting. These all come into play. When you look at this photo, I hope that you can tell that this is actually an African setting. You can tell that it's African, if not just Kenyan, from the vegetation, occasion. This is sub-Saharan vegetation. I deliberately chose an African setting because I understand African atmosphere. If you chose a different resource or image for inspiration, you would, I expect, understand that atmosphere. This will come into play when you are putting in your light source. Different colors at different time of the day are the norm for your light source. A sunset looks very different in terms of color from a noon setting. Summarily, light is complex, very, very complex. And the more you study your image, the better your chance of understanding the complexity of light. My understanding of this setting and its light was that it was quite blue. This could have been, from my understanding of Kenyan atmosphere, either very early in the morning or it could have been pre-noon, because after all, the light source has this blue tinge to it. It could have been before the rain or even after a rain. In Photoshop, let's discuss a little bit more about layer masks. A layer mask is, by and large, just a grayscale image. You will edit this image to help your atmosphere take shape. Layer masks are great for blending your images together. At the very top, you will see a small image here, and it's indicative of where your layer mask is situated. If you look at your layers panel, you have the very same. Between your FX and your adjustment layers, right there is where your layer mask resides. Additionally, in this video, I will be discussing clipping masks, which are slightly different, but they have the power to control the visibility of your layer. These are also in black and white, like layer masks. But think of layer masks as a blending tool and clipping masks as a visibility tool. I've already discussed atmosphere, and the additional considerations made towards this video are your brushes and eraser. What brush tool are you using? What brush shape are you using? Same for eraser. What eraser tool are you using? What's its shape, its opacity, its flow? All of those properties will be considered when you are choosing your tools. As a tip, you should match your brush shape with your eraser shape. You can additionally match your eraser flow and opacity with your brush flow and opacity. I do encourage you, as often, to experiment with brush shapes, eraser shapes, and for this, additionally experiment with blend modes. So the first step is to add your primary light source, which for me is my sun, and I will be control shifting, selecting all of my silhouettes. From there, I will create my layer mask to remove the sky. Remember, when we are dealing with a clipping mask, that white is positive, black is negative. And I will be using the keyboard shortcut of Alt and clicking a thumbnail to solo view the mask. So let's put that into practice, shall we? I've got my already familiar color passes in place. Here's my resource image, tucked away in the top left corner as it was. I've got my sketch, and I've got all of my color passes. Additionally, my background gradient. So far, so familiar. And so on top of my color passes, I'm going to create a new layer and call this sky. This is, after all, where I will be painting, or rather sun, where I'll be painting my light source, the sun. Like I said, be deliberate about your brushes and your erasers. Inside of my brushes, I've got a wide variety of options. From my understanding of my sun, it will be quite soft, barely visible. It won't be too harsh. You can barely see a sun per se in this setup. From this resource image, you can barely see a direct, very obvious light source. It's subtle. So I will choose a soft round opacity brush. I will additionally reduce the opacity of the same. I would take it down to cut 2. I will additionally reduce the opacity of this brush. I will take it down to perhaps 60%. Just to start. I can always add on, but it would be very difficult to remove. Let's start with the light value. I've got a light blue here. That works for me. And make my brush quite large. And then I will just gradually add some light here at the top left, because that is, after all, where my light seems to be emitting from, top left to center. And then we have the surrounding dark blue. Don't be afraid to paint outside of the sky into your background, foreground a bit even. Because now we're considering the atmosphere. And atmosphere gets everywhere. There's going to be a little bit of atmosphere on this lamp. There's going to be a lot of it on your mountains, a little bit on your chimneys, a fair amount in this brick area, onto your pillows, almost touching the extreme foreground, but not quite. Alternating between my colors using X. I'm a big fan of keyboard shortcuts. Remember that these brushes are pressure sensitive, so the more I press down, the darker or the more vibrant my hue gets. Alright. Now, when disabling my other prominent layers, it doesn't look like much. In fact, let me take the liberty of creating a whole new layer underneath it. It doesn't look like much. Very subtle blues and whites. However, this is going to make a big impact when we are introducing layer masks. So to create a layer mask, I would want to first reintroduce my color passes, and while the sun is selected, I will Control Shift click all of the objects that are in the broader silhouettes. I'm talking about my extreme background. That's in the broader silhouette. My chimney here. Those are going to be in the object silhouette that the sky will then affect. To reiterate, you will need to you will need to Control Shift select all of your silhouettes. In my case, there's the extreme foreground, foreground itself, middle ground, background, and extreme background. All of these color passes will need to be selected so that I can negate them, or think of them as removed from the influence of the sky. Let's look at that process together. With the sun icon selected, you would Control click the icons for your subsequent layers. Your extreme foreground, your foreground, your middle ground, steadily adding your background, and your extreme background. Now every item has been selected, and as you can see, they all have this running selection in their perimeter. That's a good sign. You would then holding down Alt key, click on your layer mask, and now you have an icon here with a black silhouette and a white sky around it. You can toggle between the visibility to see whether it's in place or not, and it is. Additionally, for clarity, you can hold down Alt and click. You can now see your layer mask in black and white. Remember that a layer mask is a grayscale image for blending images together and creating soft transitions between elements. The stress here is that you're creating soft transitions. You will then need a soft brush. Black is to remove, white is to add. Here you have the black and white already. So I'm going to start to add with a low opacity brush. I'm going to start to add onto the horizon because I know that this will have the greatest atmospheric effect, meaning the sky will be very, very prominent, bouncing off of the horizon the most, almost blurring everything in its path. Make use of numerical keypads to change the opacity of your brush. Your chimney will additionally have a little bit of atmospheric effects to it. Given that my light source was around this general area where my cursor is painting over, I would consider that the light would come from top left and then fall gradually, steadily onto the ground in this manner. And just ease out of its influence. I will be toggling between the silhouettes, the black and white version, and the painted version, disabling the sketch, just to see whether I'm on the right path. Painting influence or removing influence as I go along. The process is definitely not linear. It is something that you would intuit. It's an intuition, really. As many painters would attest, it's what feels and looks right. Around here is where I know my sketch, or rather my other chimney would be, reducing the opacity. Once you're satisfied with the amount of light that's being emitted from your light source and bouncing off or reflecting off of given objects, then you can move forward. At this point, we haven't added any more color to our base shapes, our foreground, our middle ground, background, extreme background. We've just been addressing the light source and adjusting the influence that it has on numerous objects in your setting. I've taken the liberty of completing this process. And here I have the same sun layer mask. Let me show you what that looks like. And here we have it. Remember that my light source was in fact coming from the top left and falling gradually onto my scene from that origin. My horizon has the most influence, and my bottom left has the least amount of influence. It's entirely black. The atmosphere is not, in fact, affecting anything inside of this corner. It's hardly affecting that side of the chimney. It is greatly affecting everything towards the top side of the stage, going down towards the horizon.